I've had a version of the same conversation with a lot of men over the years. Different ages, different lives, different circumstances. But when it gets honest, when the conversation goes past the surface, the same thing tends to come up. The same regret. Not the one most people expect. It's not the career they didn't chase. It's not the money they didn't make. It's not even the risks they didn't take. Those things come up. But they're not the one that stays. The one that stays, the one that lands differently, that sits heavier, is relational. It's almost always relational. I wasn't really there. That's the version of it I hear most often. Not absent, not checked out completely. Just not fully present. There for the events, but not for the moments. In the room, but somewhere else in his head. And by the time he realizes what that cost, what it actually cost, the people he loves, and what it cost him, the years have moved on. The kids are grown. The parents are gone or going. The marriage has adjusted around his absence the way a river adjusts around a stone. And he's left with a clarity he couldn't access before. I think this is one of the most universal experiences among men after 40. And I also think it's one of the least talked about because it carries shame. Not the clean shame of a specific mistake. The murkier kind. The shame of 1,000 small absences. 1,000 times you were preoccupied. 1,000 dinners where you were thinking about work. 1,000 moments when someone needed you to be present. And you were there in body, but somewhere else entirely. None of those moments felt significant at the time. That's the thing. Each one was forgivable. Understandable. There was always a reason. But they accumulate. And the accumulation, seen from a distance, seen in hindsight, looks like something a man never intended. A pattern of absence he didn't choose so much as drift into. But there is a strange part. When I talk to these men, the ones carrying this particular kind of regret, almost none of them were selfish. And that's what makes it so hard to understand. They weren't checked out because they didn't care. They were checked out because they cared so much about providing, about achieving, about being enough, that they funneled all of that caring into the work and left nothing for the presence. They thought that was love, the sacrifice, the long hours, the grinding it out so the family had what it needed. And it was love. It was love. I'm not dismissing that. But most men misunderstand this completely, because the people they were loving, the people they were sacrificing for, didn't primarily need the product of the sacrifice. They needed the man present, unguarded, actually there. And that's the thing a man can't buy back, can't work his way back to, that can't compensate for retroactively. He can only do something about it now. I've thought about this. I thought about why this happens. Why men, genuinely good men who love their families, end up in this particular regret. And I think it comes down to something that gets almost no attention. Men are not taught what presence actually means. They are taught what absence costs in the obvious sense. Missing the recital, not showing up, being physically gone. But the subtler absence, the one that does the real damage, is invisible. You're home. You're at the table. You're watching the game with your kid. But you're not there. The mind is somewhere else. The worry, the planning, the low-grade stress that follows a man home from work and sits with him through dinner and bedtime and everything else. And most men never realize they're doing it, because it doesn't feel like a choice. It feels like a natural state of the man who's caring a lot, which is true. But it's also the mechanism of the regret. And this is where things become interesting. Because the cost of that mental absence isn't always visible in the short term. Kids adapt. Parents adapt. Life adjusts around the gap. So there is no immediate feedback. No moment where someone says, you're not really here. Just a slow disconnection, a slow accumulation that only becomes visible from a distance. And something changes after 40 that I find genuinely significant. the ability to look backward clearly. When you're young, the past is recent enough that it's still tangled up with justification. You remember why you made the choices you made. The context is still alive. But after 40, after enough distance has accumulated, the context starts to fade. And what you're left with is just what happened. Not why it happened. Not what you intended. Just the effect. The effect on your kids, on your partner, on yourself. And that clarity, unmediated by justification, is where the regret lives. Most men encounter it sometime in their 40s. Some earlier, some later. But when it arrives, it's specific, more specific than they expected. Not a general sense of having fallen short, but particular moments, particular people, particular faces, looking for something that wasn't quite there. Here's what I've come to believe about this. Regret, real regret, the kind that stays, is actually a form of integrity. It's the self recognizing a gap between the man you were and the man you wanted to be. And that recognition, painful as it is proof that you cared, that the values were always there. The love was always there. The execution just didn't match. And I think men need to hear that. Because the tendency, when regret arrives, is to turn it into a verdict, to use it as evidence of fundamental failure. I wasn't a good father. I wasn't a good husband. I wasn't enough. But that framing is too blunt. And it isn't useful. Because what's actually true for most men who carry this is more complicated and more forgiving than that. You were doing what you knew, operating on the programming you'd been given, carrying stresses that were real in a culture that gave you almost no tools for managing them inwardly. That doesn't excuse the absence, but it does explain it. And the difference between excusing and explaining is the difference between staying stuck and actually doing something with what you now understand. So I want to ask you something. Is there someone in your life, someone close, someone who matters, who doesn't fully have your presence? Not because you don't love them, but because your attention was always somewhere elsewhere. Because the worry and the planning and the weight of everything follows you into the moments you were supposed to be theirs. If the honest answer is yes, I'm not asking you to feel bad about it. I'm asking you to notice it. Because noticing it now is very different from noticing later. If you are 40, at 55, or at 60, with years of accumulated distance between you and the people you love most. The regret that men carry after 40 almost never comes from the dramatic failures. It comes from the ordinary days, the Tuesday evenings, the Sunday mornings, the unremarkable moments that turned out to be the substance of everything. And those moments, the ones happening right now, this week, this month, those are still available to you. Not perfectly, not with some wholesale transformation, just more consciously than before. The biggest regret men have after 40 isn't a single event. It's a texture. The texture of a life lived slightly above the surface of itself, moving fast enough that the real moments passed by before he could fully land in them. And I think the reason that particular regret is so common is that it's the natural cost of how men are wired to operate. Always forward, always building, always solving. Those are not bad instincts, but they need a counterweight. Something that pulls you back into the present, back into the room, back into the face in front of you. Not as a rejection of ambition, not as some retreat from the world, just as the practice of being where you are while you're actually there. That's not soft. That's not a small thing. It might be the most important thing. Because at the end, and the men who've gotten close to the end understand this. It's not the achievement that fills the room. It's the presence. The times you were actually there. I think about the men I've talked to, the ones carrying this. And what I notice is that the regret, as heavy as it is, almost always coexists with something else. A kind of love that's still very much alive for the kids who are now adults, for the partner who stayed, for the life that was built even through all the absence. The love was always there. And the men who do something with the regret, the ones who let it teach them rather than bury them, they don't spend the rest of their lives compensating. They just show up differently, not dramatically, not with some announcement, just more there than before. And it turns out that's enough. It's almost always enough.